Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to the letter G in the alphabet of my favourite films. Again, there's not a huge number of films in this list, so hopefully it won't be too long a video. Again, please let me know in the comments below your favourite films beginning with the letter G. I always enjoy reading the comments, and it usually gives me some ideas of what films to watch as well. So again, you can let me know which films I've left out or which films I've completely forgotten about. There will be films that I haven't seen beginning with the letter G that aren't on the list that possibly should be, or again, ones that I've just completely forgotten. So let's start with a great film by Francis Ford Coppola, Gardens of Stone. Yes, there will be spoiler alert, the Godfather films are not on this list. I'm just not the biggest fan of the Godfather films. I would take Gardens of Stone and Apocalypse Now and The Conversation above the Godfather films, but obviously that's sacrilege to some people, but never mind. Gardens of Stone is set in 1968 during Vietnam. This is one of the films Coppola had to make to pay back the debts for Zoetrope Studios after One from the Heart. So he made a series of films in the 80s. This is from 1987, to essentially pay back these debts. But Gardens of Stone is a fantastic anti-war film starring James Caan, D.B. Sweeney, Angelica Houston, and a wonderful performance by James Earl Jones. It's set in Arlington, and James Caan and James Earl Jones are involved with military burials, and obviously their business is quite booming during Vietnam, and it kind of tells the relationship between D.B. Sweeney, who's a fresh-faced youth who wants to go over and see action in Vietnam, and James Caan, who is more and more disillusioned with America's position in Vietnam. And he tries to persuade D.B. Sweeney that going to Vietnam isn't really a very good idea. It's just understated. It's wonderfully acted. Coppola doesn't direct it in a very showy, look at me, I'm the director way. It's kind of matter of fact, but it's just well written and well acted, and it's just a great wee film. And as usual, Indicator do a great job with extras. There's a documentary with Coppola, there's a commentary with a critic, there's a 65-minute Guardian interview with Angelica Houston, and there's a lovely booklet, as you'd expect from Indicator. I would highly recommend it. I mean, it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I just love it and have since I saw it a long time ago. So next on the list is Buster Keaton's The General. This is Eureka Spy number 172 to 174. This also has Sherlock Jr. and Steamboat Bill. This is just a relatively new release. and I have to say the prints are stunning. Considering the General was made in 1926, the print is just absolutely gorgeous. Eureka, again, they kind of do the best work on silent films. That's where they kind of excel over Criterion. I've always kind of preferred Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd to Charlie Chaplin. Again, that might be sacrilege to some people. I do really need to watch Chaplin again, but certainly growing up I always preferred Keaton and Lloyd. And the General is just a simple story, but it's just told so beautifully. Buster Keaton's impassive face is just wonderful. It's great set pieces. There's obviously amazing stuff involving trains. This episode was kind of based on a true story that happened in the Civil War about a guy who, there was a plan to kidnap trains, steal a train, and then this one man managed to steal it back and thwart a whole attack. Buster Keaton does play somebody from the south, but it doesn't really matter which side he's on. It's just really an interesting story from the Civil War. It's not political in any way, and there's just great moments with him sitting on the wheel as it's going round, or trying to kiss a girl but having to salute everybody that goes by. It's just really well made. Again, the print's wonderful, and it's a really nice film. Next on the list is Gilda, Charles Vidor, with Glenn Ford, Rita Hayworth, and George McCready, who seems to be popping up in more and more films that I own. Gilda is a film noir with so many subversive undertows. Doesn't even make sense. There's obviously a kind of subplot of a homosexual relationship between Glenn Ford and George McCready. George McCready always talks about, his little friend that makes decisions for him, which allegedly is the blade on his walking stick. There's just a weird kind of tension between Glenn Ford and George McCready throughout the film. Rita Hayworth's Gilda is kind of just the cipher for the film between the two of them, but you don't really feel there's a kind of sexual relationship going on between George McCready and Rita Hayworth. The story is that George McCready happens to meet Glenn Ford, is down in his luck, brings him in to run his casino, where he meets Rita Hayworth, who's recently married George McCready, and Glenn Ford and Rita Hayworth have a history. And then there's lots of plots about Nazi plans to monopolise, I don't think it's the rubber industry, it's aluminium or something like that. I can't actually remember. It's just, I'm not describing it very well, but it's a fantastic noir. The dialogue is fantastic. It is cynical. It's quite nasty in places. Granted, with the Hays Code, the ending is perhaps not necessarily the ending it should have had. But it's one of the list on kind of the essential film noirs. This is Criterion, and It has a commentary by Richard Schnickel. It has an interview, and it has a piece from 2010 featuring Martin Scorsese and Baz Luhrmann. And it also has a 1964 episode of the television show Hollywood in the Stars, The Odyssey of Rita Hayworth. And it also has a booklet as well with a nice pink spine. So that's Gilda. Apologies because I didn't really describe it very well, but it's fantastic. Speaking of fantastic, this is one of my favourite films of all time and will get into the top 150. It's Glengarry Glen Ross by James Foley, even though you always kind of think of it as a David Mamet film, but directed by James Foley, written by David Mamet, based on his play. He added the now infamous 8-minute speech by Alec Baldwin, which wasn't in the original play. This is a film, along with Blue Collar, that you could watch as a double bill about working for a living. It's just fantastic. It's about estate agents. I know, it sounds fascinating, doesn't it? It's about estate agents under pressure to get sales and how they react. Again, doesn't sound amazing. I absolutely loved this film when it came out. It just blew me away. My family, not so much, because of it's pretty much the only film that in a movie review book I saw was rated R for relentless profanity. Even though, to be fair, the profanity isn't relentless. It just happens to come in big, huge chunks of profanity. Obviously, my mother didn't like it because Jack Lemmon does have a potty mouth in this. And I remember showing it to other relatives and they were just like, what? Because it's pretty much nothing happens. It's just guys sitting around talking nonsense and swearing at each other, but it's absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you how much I love this film and how sad I am. I actually recorded the audio and had it on cassette in my personal stereo. Now, obviously, young people can only imagine. We used to have cassette players that were personal that you could carry about. This is before personal CD players and obviously MP3 players. And I was so sad that I actually recorded Glengarry Glen Ross on a 90-minute cassette and had it on my personal stereo. Because I just loved the dialogue. The dialogue is just like, it's typical Mamet. You know, perhaps unrealistic, but it's just so wonderful. The cast is arguably one of the greatest casts ever assembled. You have Al Pacino as the slick Ricky Roma, the best salesman. You have the wonderful Alan Arkin as George, who's the kind of the mensch. He's kind of the workman-like guy, the browbeaten guy who's just solid. You have the wonderful Jack Lemmon as Shelley Levine, who used to be great, as you know, but not so much now. I mean, it's one of the great crimes of the Academy Awards that Jack Lemmon didn't win the Oscar for this, because the more you watch it, his performance is just absolutely brilliant and heartbreaking, because even though he's not playing a particularly nice man, and despite the things that he does in the film, you still are moved in the end and you feel for him, even though he's not actually particularly a nice man. Jack Lemmon, it's one of Jack Lemmon's greatest performances, and the fact that he didn't get an Oscar is just sacrilege. But then the Oscars don't really like to give awards to people who play roles that are very sweary, even though for some reason Denzel Washington got one for the abysmal Training Day. You have Kevin Spacey, before he was famous, as the manager of The Office, who just takes lots of abuse, especially from Al Pacino. Al Pacino's abuse-laden tirades are just spectacular. You have Ed Harris as another salesman who is just cynical and blames everybody else for his problems apart from himself. And he has wonderful sweary tirades as well. You have Jonathan Pryce as a slightly sheepish, controlled by his wife customer who Al Pacino gets a huge sale from, but it might not necessarily go through. It's just amazingly acted. I mean, obviously actors love Mamet scripts because they're very wordy, and they have, you know, great chunks of dialogue to spout. It's just a sensational film. Probably nobody else really loves it as much as I do, but I mean, on the basis of this, I don't think this was the first Mamet that I ever saw. You know, it's directed by James Foley. I think I'd seen House of Games and Homicide, and obviously loved them. And then I saw this, and then I saw Oleana in the theatre in London when I actually used to go outside. And I've never actually seen Glengarry Glen Ross on stage. But the film is just sensational. I mean, I absolutely love it. For a film that essentially nothing happens, even though it does, but it happens off camera. Essentially, really good, expensive new leads come in, and there's a robbery at the office. So it is a bit of a Agatha Christie as well. A sweary Agatha Christie. It's just a tremendous film if you love Mamet. If you love films that are just all dialogue, it's just amazing. And that's why it's on the list. And it probably will be fairly high on the top 150 magical illusionary film list. Okay, next is a Martin Scorsese film. As far as I'm concerned, his second best one, but then I'm just weird. It's Goodfellas. This was the film that Scorsese was kind of tired of films getting faster and faster, so he just went, okay, I'm going to make this film as fast as possible, and it rattles along. And it's also a film that does undercut The Godfather a bit, as far as this idea of this noble mafia and this, you know, honour in the mafia. I mean, this just shows the mob as what they are. It's just a bunch of thugs. You have Ray Liotta in his finest performance as Henry Hill, and it just follows him in his life through the mafia. I mean, Henry Hill is essentially just a thug. You have Joe Pesci in his career best performance that he essentially just repeated for the rest of his career, and he's just a psychopath. And you have another seminal, fantastic performance by Robert De Niro, and he's a sociopath. So there's no great noble, you know, gangsters here. They're just all thugs and psychopaths. Robert De Niro again just underplays it and just lets everybody else do all the noisy stuff. You know, you've got Joe Pesci chewing scenery over here, you've got Ray Liotta strutting about, and then De Niro is just understated but completely menacing. The scene at the bar after the robbery, when he's told everybody you know, don't spend any money, be quiet for a few months. But of course everybody just ignores him and starts buying cars and fur coats. And that scene in the bar where he's pretty much just looking round at everybody, figuring out who he's going to whack, is just classic De Niro. All about the eyes. The soundtrack's fantastic. Scorsese's use of the camera is wonderful. Back when Scorsese was actually vibrant and interesting, it's a great film, but still not my favourite Scorsese, but second favourite Scorsese. Next on the list is another one that's probably going to get into my top 20. I can say that right now. It's The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. My second favourite Sergio Leone, behind Once Upon a Time in the West, even though this is probably more fun than Once Upon a Time in the West, even though Once Upon a Time in the West is slightly the better film, I think. This is one of those films that I loved from an early age, before I knew what cinema was or what a good film was. I must have seen The Good, the Bad and the Ugly probably about 100 times now. Whenever it was on, I would watch it. There's something beautiful about that relationship, the triangular relationship between Lee Van Cleef, who's just wonderful in it, Eli Wallach and Clint Eastwood. That relationship of these guys would kill each other if it's in their interest to kill each other. You know, if there's a few hundred gold pieces in it. But there's also a real respect for each other, which I just don't think has ever been bettered in a film since. That kind of respect, but also they would easily just shoot each other. Musically, it's Ennio Morricone amongst his best work. It's the fact that it takes about 40 minutes just to introduce the characters, the three main characters. Again, it's another one of Leone's long films that feel short. Again, Tarantino could actually learn a lesson. The extended version, you know, they restored some scenes, including a scene with Lee Van Cleef where they have to use another actor's voice to do Lee Van Cleef. I don't actually think adds to the film. I think I prefer the version that I saw 50 times before this version came out. But it's just absolutely wonderful. Everybody knows about it. You know, the last scene in the graveyard is just perfection. The scene where set during the Civil War, and the scene in the river when both sides are fighting over a bridge, it's just amazing. Leone got bigger and bigger as the Dollars trilogy kind of went on. You know, Clint Eastwood has the great line of he's never seen such a waste of life before. It's a truly great film. You've got to see it in the big screen. Like all Leone's work, really. It's an absolute blast. It's got great lines, it's got great humour, and obviously wonderful set pieces. And it's one of those films that you understand, for me, why films are just so amazing. Anyway, next on the list is The Great Silence. Nazarene Prod did a video on it this week. I did a random review. It was one of my first random reviews when I picked up this fantastic Blu-ray release, which is from Film Movement Classics. It is multi-region. This is just a stunning spaghetti western, Sergio Corbucci, which is better than Django, starring Klaus Kinski and Jean-Louis Trintignant, which obviously isn't how you pronounce his name, but that's the way I pronounce his name. It's unusual for a spaghetti western, but it's also familiar. It's completely snowbound, which is obviously unusual. The lead character, the hero, is a mute. That's why it's a great silence, even though for years I always thought it was the big silence. It's political in the sense of it's about a community that the landowners have pushed the poor people out and have employed bounty hunters led by Klaus Kinski to pretty much get rid of them. It has a stunning ending. There was rumours at one point that Clint Eastwood was going to buy the rights to remake it, but obviously he was probably going to change the ending. This Blu-ray release is stunning. I think it's over time it is getting more and more kind of love as it deserves, because it is a better film than Django, even though Django's Corbucci's more famous one. Again, the score's by Ennio Morricone. I mean, what else do you want? This release has a nice interview with Alex Cox, because again, I think this was in Moviedrome, BBC Two. I think this is the first time I saw it and was just blown away by it. There's also a 1968 documentary about spaghetti westerns, and it has the original Italian with English subtitles or a dubbed version. It's 105 minutes and it's absolutely fantastic. Next on the list, Gregory's Girl by Bill Forsyth. This is fantastic. It's almost worth getting because it has an audio commentary with Bill Forsyth and Mark Kermode, and it also has an interview with Bill Forsyth, an interview with Claire Grogan, and it bizarrely has the alternative US audio soundtrack, which you don't really want to listen to. It's for those of us who were a little awkward around girls when we were younger, and it really shows, that awkwardness, and also this idea that girls are something strange, that girls are almost a different species, and how boys kind of put them on a pedestal, whereas they're generally just the same, but we do kind of look at them differently when we're growing up. So you have Dee Hepburn's character, who becomes a member of the football team, and she's looked at as an object, she's looked at with awe, whereas all the other girls are just kind of normal. But the boys aren't really interested in them, they're interested in this kind of fantasy, and it really kind of sums that up, and I think it's the best film that ever has summed that up, and the awkwardness of certain boys around girls at an early age. Apart from that, it's hilarious. It's the comedy is just so well done. It's not an American high school gross out comedy. It's intelligent comedy. It's one of Bill Forsyth's little gems. Obviously, Local Hero is coming out in the next couple of months, finally on Blu-ray, which will be an absolute joy. And obviously has Comfort and Joy and That Sinking Feeling, and Housekeeping, which is Indicator, which is a really interesting film. But Gregory's Girl, it's just a perfect little film made for pennies, but it's just full of so much truth. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. Yes, the Scottish accents might put you off a little bit, but it's just wonderful. There's a joy to it, and there's a truth to it, and it's just fantastic. Next on the list, speaking about truth, it's Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man. This is a documentary that Herzog made using found footage, essentially. It tells the story of Timothy Treadwell, a man who lived with bears for 13 summers in Alaska. Before, spoiler alert, not really, a bear killed and ate him and his girlfriend. And this, in true Herzog style, it's the story of a guy who embraced nature. You know, as Herzog said, when Timothy Treadwell looked into the eyes of a bear, he saw kind of some kinship. He saw, a soul there, something he could communicate with. Whereas when Werner Herzog looks into the eyes of a bear, all he can see is death. It's Herzog's, it's one of his best films about, because he's very big on nature and the destructive power of nature, with tornadoes and volcanoes and great big bears, the destructive power of nature. But that's shown the other side of Timothy Treadwell, who embraced it and saw it as, didn't necessarily respect the destructive power of nature. Again, it's found footage, so there's lots of video of Timothy Treadwell talking himself, and there's the famous scene where his cameras actually, Timothy Treadwell's characters, captured his death, but not with video, fortunately, just with audio. And there's the wonderful scene with Herzog listening to the audio, and he's obviously just looking fairly shocked, and pretty much says to Timothy Treadwell's mother, nobody should ever hear this. And quite brilliantly, he doesn't play the audio in the film, because Herzog's not like that. I'm sure in the hands of other filmmakers, they would have probably put the audio up for us all to listen, but Herzog's better than that. It's a wonderful film. Again, Herzog doesn't tell you whether Treadwell's right or wrong. He just pretty much shows you the evidence, as a proper filmmaker should do. Sure, he gives his opinion about nature, but he doesn't judge, and that's obviously what an artist should do, because there's so many documentaries that do judge, and that's not the purpose of it. So from Grizzly Man to Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day, to me, is kind of the perfect romantic comedy, but it just covers so much more ground. We all know the story. Bill Murray is a grouchy weatherman who gets stuck in the same day and learns over time about the people in the town. I mean, some people could say it's overly sentimental, but I don't really think it is. This gets suicide in it, and it's just a perfect confection of the Hollywood light comedy. It's just fantastic. Yeah, it's Harold Ramis. I always get Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman mixed up for some reason. They both wear glasses. It's Harold Ramis of Ghostbusters fame. I mean, people have written articles about its metaphysical nature. You know, its layers. It's as deep as you want to make it, and it's just wonderful. Great performances by Bill Murray, Andy McDowell, before she disappeared, is light and fluffy as Andy McDowell always was, and it just puts a smile on my face, which doesn't happen very often. Next on the list is again something completely different, and it's Gumshoe. I did a double take video on Gumshoe. You can go watch that if you're in that kind of mood. Gumshoe is a great wee film by Stephen Frears starring Albert Finney, and it's a kind of realistic detective film. It's dirty and grubby. It's not glamorous in any way, shape or form. Great support with Billy Whitelaw. It's just a wonderful little film. Not flashy. It's one of Albert Finney's best performances. Again, this is another Indicator release, and it's a fantastic release. It's original artwork, and again, Indicator have done a wonderful job on this. There's an interview with Stephen Frears. There's the writer interview, the producer, the editor, the production designer. There's Frears' debut short film, The Burning, and obviously a booklet with interviews and essays. So that's Gumshoe, that I would highly recommend if you're looking for a detective film that's a little bit different, a little bit realistic. And the last one on the list, you'll be glad to know, it's The Gunfighter by Henry King, starring the wonderful Gregory Peck. Now this has, for about a year, it was supposed to be getting a Blu-ray release, and then Amazon emailed to say this is not getting a Blu-ray release. So hopefully one day somebody will release it in Blu-ray, because it really deserves to be on Blu-ray. It's from 1950, and it's just so good. Again, pretty low budget, not a lot happens in it. Gregory Peck is a famous gunfighter, Jimmy Ringo, who comes back to the town where his ex-wife is, who's a school teacher, and he just wants to see her and see his child. But he continually comes up against people because he's known as the fastest gun. He's always coming up against people who want to draw against him to prove they're faster and to say they killed the fastest gun. And Gregory Peck just gives this wonderful, world-weary, tired performance as people are continually challenging him to gunfights. I won't give away the ending, but the ending is just fantastic. as far as, you know, the burden and the weight of being known as the fastest gun, and it's a wonderful film that deserves Blu-ray treatment. It's kind of a film you'd think Arrow Academy would pick up, because they are doing a good job of picking up really good westerns, because they're releasing The Far Country by Anthony Mann with Jimmy Stewart in a couple of months. And the Gunfighter really deserves some Blu-ray attention and more love, because it's a great wee film with a wonderful Gregory Peck performance. Carol Malden's in it as well. It's really excellent. So thanks very much for watching this video of the letter G. Again, please leave comments on your lists with the letter G, and hopefully that will give me more ideas for films to watch. And hopefully we'll see you again for the letter H. You can start your homework early and think about films beginning with the letter H. So thank you very much for watching, and this is Solitary Ronin saying farewell.